these numbers try to answer that question, when published, started a bit of controversy. I mean, how could the meat everyone's eating cause more greenhouse gas emissions than what's caused by powering all the cars, trucks, planes, and trains that we drive and fly every day? I mean, how could that be? But instead of 18%, as that original 2006 United Nations report stated, or even their most recent figure of 14.5%, a couple of researchers found that livestock could produce, I mean, it's possible they could produce as much as 51% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. Now, most scientific organizations are not on board with this figure yet, but there are a number of reasons for the differences between these two numbers, low to high. Most important for me is the vast underreporting in that 2006 United Nations report at 14.5% or 18% even. The use of inaccurate global warming potential for methane, they used 21 instead of 86 or 120. And these reports also fail to factor in all the greenhouse gases emitted because of our demand to eat fish, the fuel, refrigeration, processing, packaging, transportation, et cetera. And there's profound bias amongst the authors of those reports, who are well-known consultants for the livestock industry. All have affiliations, partnerships with the meat, dairy, and egg industries. Of course, they're not going to come up with the right numbers that would indict the very industries that they're working for. And the bias continues today, with recent articles such as this one that you see that attempts to defend those lower greenhouse gas numbers for the livestock industry. It's so very true what they say at the top of this article. We need to get the numbers right from a public opinion standpoint as well as a policymaking standpoint. But again, all these authors have very deep ties to the meat and dairy industries. Well, so these lower numbers of 18% and 14.5% also don't properly factor in land use optimization, or what could be referred to as carbon opportunity costs, how land might be used more carbon and methane efficiently. With these costs properly positioned into the equation, many could argue that animal agriculture is indeed responsible for minimally between 37 and 51%. In fact, my good colleague, Dr. Sailesh Rao, has recently eloquently proposed that animal agriculture may be responsible for, well, maybe responsible for 87% of all global human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore the leading cause of climate change. So if you're not familiar with Dr. Rao's work, I'd highly recommend listening to his presentation at this event, and also during the panel discussion, where I'll join him and Glenn Mercer on Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And regardless of where the exact number resides, somewhere between 14.5 or 51, or perhaps likely 87%, with all factors considered, it's cause for alarm and immediate action. A perfect example of how all this information is suppressed occurs every single year during the climate change conferences, called the Conference of the Parties, held originally in Kyoto with its 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Last year it was the 26th yearly conference held in Glasgow. This year it'll be held in Morocco, where countries come together and they're trying to solve this global warming problem, but none of this that you see at the bottom of the screen is being addressed. Well, organizers at COP26 last year realized that the time is running out, established an agreement to reduce methane emissions by 30% of the year 2020 levels by the year 2030, and 105 countries signed on. So this was touted as a highlight and a success. Well, this was essentially a failure because there's no legally binding contract, there's no metric, there's no penalties, the timeline doesn't correlate with the increasing severity of the problem, and the three largest emitters, Russia, China, and India, didn't even pledge. And in the future, there's going to be much more greenhouse gases emitted from natural causes, such as methane, from the thawing of permafrost and the tundra, because of all the damage we've already done leading up to today, which is set off feedback looping mechanisms that accelerate global warming beyond and much faster than we first calculated. Well, the focus once again today is on fossil fuel reduction, with no regard to livestock, even though, again, animal agriculture is the largest emitter of human-induced methane in the world. Gas and oil is around 23%, coal's at 12%, but animal agriculture is just under 50%. Taking this a step further, our government enacted this emissions reduction plan. This is a plan whereby $17 billion will be used to help meet the goal of reducing U.S. methane emissions. But all this is targeted at the oil and gas industry, all the funding, even a methane tax at $900 per ton emitted starting next year, and going up to $1,500 a ton by 2025. Well, it's fully targeting the gas and oil industry. I mean, do they need to be penalized? Yeah, of course they do, but they're not the problem. The only thing mentioned in this entire action plan to reduce methane in the agricultural sector is, well, they're going to set up a research committee to further assess the situation. Nothing at all in terms of incentivizing penalties or taxation to the meat and dairy industries. No funding set aside, nothing. And you have to ask the question, why was some marketing catchphrase used like 30% by the year 2030 rather than simply enacting what we should do and what the planet needs? So here's what I propose based on what the planet desperately needs regarding methane. First, we have precise and complete accounting methods globally for the production of methane by the end of this year. Then mandated education about the reality of climate change, the dire timelines we're on, the factual impact of animal agriculture, and solutions. And then we set bars for emissions of methane to be cut by 50% across all sectors by the year 2027 and to 0% by the year 2030. And we shouldn't accept anything less. And those industries and individual farmers and businesses that succeed in doing this could receive tax breaks. And those who do not will have strict penalties imposed. All this funded by the reallocation of government money that's already set aside for targeting gas and oil, and by the revenue generated, of course, by collecting methane taxes on all those animal agriculture operations and businesses that are not complying. Well, every aspect of global depletion has a timeline. It's not really a question of if we're going to run out of something, it's when at our current pace. One of the most critical timelines of all is that of climate change. Climate scientists believe that we've already passed our timeline because now it's more of a matter of how to minimize the change in climate that we've set into motion and thereby minimize the future damage. And it does appear dire when we view just how much greenhouse gas we've dumped into the atmosphere since 1850. Carbon dioxide levels they've always been hovering around 277 parts per million for the past 10,000 years. That's that lower green line that you see across the slide. For 10,000 years, it's been in one spot. And then look what happened at the far right. Today, we're at 420 parts per million. So the first goal would be to drop our emissions so that we are not contributing further to this number. And then the second goal, again, would be to get rid of all that extra carbon dioxide that we've emitted since the 1800s. Otherwise, it just hangs around for hundreds of more years, causing more climate issues. Well, how do we do that? Well, we could use some geoengineering and spray some material into our atmosphere to block the sun's rays at various times, which is being proposed and obviously just cause more problems. Or perhaps we could use some high technology and build machines that could extract the excess carbon dioxide and bury it beneath the ground, like this company is starting to do in Iceland. But one of these single units costs $15 million and would require nearly 100 million of these units worldwide to pull down the extra carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And it's predicted to take about 75 to 100 years to simply scale up to produce these many units. So relying on this type of technological approach, well, it would cost us $1 quadrillion. Yeah, $1 quadrillion, whatever that's supposed to be, take till the end of the century to be fully effective. And this won't address any other aspect of global depletion that we're going to discuss through today and on Tuesday. So I have another approach. But first, before we get to that approach, we first need to look at some simple and relevant figures. Now, if you do the math, it's conceivable that we could exceed our budget, what scientists believe is allowed for more atmospheric carbon. We could exceed the budget by the year 2050 before we begin a quicker spiraling downward regarding climate change. We'd exceed that budget without the energy sector of fossil fuels even factored into the equation, simply due to raising livestock.